Chapter 1, Collision Course. The air was thick with tension as Detective Cara Martinez tightened the cuffs around Damien Crane's wrists. The luxury penthouse, sleek, sterile, and reeking of entitlement, was in chaos behind her. Paramedics wheeled out the lifeless body of a young woman, her name still unknown but her story already too familiar. Another whistleblower, silenced. Cara's jaw clenched. She'd seen too many of these in her 10 years on the force. Damien, dressed in silk pajamas and an arrogance only old money could breed, smirked as if this was all a minor inconvenience. "You're making a mistake, detective," he said smoothly. "My lawyer's going to have your badge on his wall." Cara didn't flinch. "Then I hope he's got good taste in frames." By morning, the city was buzzing. Crane's arrest made headlines, the tabloids feasting on the fall of the heir to Crane Pharmaceuticals. Cara barely had time to sip her bitter precinct coffee when he arrived, Julian Blake. He walked into the precinct like he owned it. Tailored navy suit, watch that probably cost more than her car, and a confidence that turned heads. But it was his eyes, piercing, calculated, that locked on hers across the room like a dare. "Detective Martinez," he greeted, flashing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "We meet again." Cara folded her arms, bracing herself. "Didn't think you did low-life cases." Julian chuckled. "Only when the stakes are high. And Crane's family, well, they like to win." In court, the tension between them ignited. Cara took the stand, detailing the sequence of events, the overdose, the tempered medical records, the witness report. But Julian was surgical in his cross-examination, charming the jury, twisting her words just enough to plant doubt. "So, detective," he said, circling like a wolf. "Are you absolutely certain the evidence wasn't influenced by your personal biases against the Crane family?" Her spine straightened. "I'm certain that young woman is dead, and Damien Crane was the last one to see her alive." A flicker of something unreadable passed through Julian's face. For a moment, just a moment, Cara saw past the polished veneer. But it vanished as quickly as it came. When court adjourned, Julian caught her outside the steps of the courthouse. "You're passionate," he said, adjusting his cufflinks. "But passion doesn't win cases. Proof does." Cara leaned in, close enough for him to smell the coffee on her breath and the fire behind her eyes. "Then you'd better hope I don't find more proof," she whispered. "Because if I do, I'll bury your client. And I won't stop there." Julian smiled again, but this time, it wavered. This wasn't just another case anymore. This was personal. For both of them. Chapter 2, The Thin Blue Line. The sirens outside her apartment had barely faded before Cara Martinez collapsed onto the worn couch, her son Leo curled beside her, half asleep and clinging to his stuffed dinosaur. The tension from court clung to her like smoke. Julian Blake's smirk, the way he twisted her testimony, the arrogance with which he defended a man she knew in her gut was guilty. But Cara didn't have the luxury of stewing in frustration. Dinner still needed making, laundry sat untouched, and Leo had a math test in the morning. She kissed his forehead gently and rose to her feet. Another long night ahead. Across town, Julian stepped into the sleek, glass-paneled office of Whitaker & Lang, the most formidable law firm on the East Coast. A team of associates flanked him with folders and espresso shots, but he waved them off. He didn't care about the perks tonight. He cared about the conversation waiting in the partners' lounge. "Julian," said Martin Lang, one of the founding partners, as he poured bourbon into 2 crystal tumblers. "Crane's arrest is messy, but it's salvageable. You win this, and we'll fast-track you for junior partner. The board likes loyalty. And results." Julian accepted the drink, but his mind flickered to the bruises he'd seen on the victim's arms in the case file. He'd defended dozens of questionable clients, but something about this one made his skin itch. Still, ambition had a voice of its own. "I won't let you down," Julian said. Meanwhile, back at Cara's apartment, the evening spiraled in small, quiet ways. Leo had forgotten his homework at school, and Cara's worn laptop froze while she tried to look up the school's website. She pressed her temples, exhausted. When Leo asked, "Are we going to be okay, Mama?" she forced a smile she didn't feel. "We always are, baby. Always." The next morning brought chaos. Cameras and reporters swarmed the courthouse as Cara stepped out of her squad car. She didn't see the woman with the mic until it was too late. "Detective Martinez. Is it true you're targeting Damien Crane because of past vendettas? What's your connection to his father's political donors?" Cara froze, blindsided, until a figure stepped between her and the press. "Julian." "Back off," he said coolly, shielding her with his body. No comment. She looked up at him, stunned. "Why would you?" "I don't like bullies," he said, then added with a crooked grin, "except when I'm cross-examining them." For a heartbeat, their eyes met, less like enemies, more like two people carrying different weights. Then Cara straightened her shoulders and brushed past him. "Thanks," she muttered. "Don't mention it," he replied. "Really? Don't." That night, alone again in her apartment, Cara stared at her wall of case notes. She wanted to believe justice would win this time. But with Julian Blake across the aisle, and a system rigged for men like Damian Crane, belief felt fragile. Still, she wasn't backing down. Chapter 3, Shadow Evidence. The footage should have been there. Cara stared at the blank screen in the evidence room, her pulse beginning to throb in her neck. The timestamp was right, 2:17 a.m., the night the whistleblower died, but instead of the hallway outside Damian Crane's penthouse, the video was just static. Then black. Gone. "Check the backups," she barked to the tech officer, who only shook his head. "There's nothing, Detective. No trace of that file ever existing." But she had seen it, 2 nights ago, in a grainy thumbnail as the forensics team cataloged digital assets. Someone had gone in and wiped it clean. Cara's stomach twisted. Only someone inside the department could have accessed that footage. She left the precinct with her coat clenched tightly around her and paranoia prickling at the back of her neck. Every glance from a colleague now felt suspicious. Who had something to lose if Damian Crane went down? Who had something to gain? Across the city, Julian was poring over Crane's case file when a man in a camel coat entered his office unannounced. "Julian," said Alistair Crane, Damian's father. Tall. Silver-haired. Razor-sharp eyes and a voice smooth as glass. "I wasn't expecting." "You're not here to expect. You're here to deliver," Alistair interrupted. He stepped forward, placing a thick, unmarked envelope on Julian's desk. "We hired you because you win. Not because you ask questions." Julian eyed the envelope. "And what is this?" "Insurance. In case you resolve. Waivers." Julian didn't touch it. "I don't take bribes." Alistair smiled. "It's not a bribe, son. It's a warning. There's a very thin line between success and career suicide. And you're walking it." The older man left without waiting for a response, leaving Julian alone in his office with the envelope, and a growing sense of unease. He didn't open it. Not yet. But he could feel the weight of it like a landmine on his desk. Later that evening, Cara sat alone at her kitchen table, flipping through an old notebook, her husband's. Notes from his last case, jotted in tight, methodical handwriting. She hadn't opened it in years. But now, something about the missing footage, the vanishing evidence, and the sudden pushback on the Crane investigation brought back an itch she hadn't felt since the night he died. A name was circled on one of the pages. A Crane? Suppression? Her eyes narrowed. She picked up her phone and called the internal affairs contact she trusted. "I need you to run a quiet check," she said. "Someone in my department may be feeding intel to the Cranes. I want names." As she hung up, Leo peeked into the kitchen, sleepily rubbing his eyes. "Mom? Why are you still up?" She closed the notebook and gave him a smile. "Just working on a puzzle, sweetheart." A puzzle she intended to solve, even if the pieces were being stolen right out from under her. Chapter 4, Coffee and Cross-Examinations. The rain came down in sheets, slicking the Manhattan streets in a blur of headlights and reflections. It was nearly midnight when Cara ducked into a narrow, dimly lit diner tucked between a laundromat and a pawn shop. The scent of burnt coffee and fried onions welcomed her like an old friend. She was soaked to the bone, her coat useless against the storm, but she didn't care. The day had been a disaster, more tampered evidence, more silence from her superiors, and now whispers that she was too emotionally involved to lead the Crane case. She just needed coffee. And quiet. But as she slid into a booth near the window, a familiar voice cut through the soft hum of the diner's radio. "Detective Martinez. Do you haunt diners, or is this fate doing its best impression of irony?" She looked up, and there he was. Julian Blake, rolling up the sleeves of his designer shirt, a case file open on the table in front of him, a half-empty mug steaming beside him. "Don't flatter yourself," she muttered, shrugging off her coat. "This place just happens to serve real coffee, not whatever artisanal nonsense you drink in Midtown." Julian smirked. "Touché." For a moment, neither of them spoke. The rain tapped against the glass, steady and hypnotic. Cara sipped her coffee, watching him from the corner of her eye. He looked tired. Less polished. There was a darkness under his eyes that hadn't been there before. "You always work this late?" she finally asked. He glanced up, surprised by the softness in her tone. "Only when the stakes feel personal." She raised an eyebrow. And Crane feels personal to you? No, he said quietly, but the things he's connected to do. It wasn't what she expected. And maybe it was the hour, or the rain, or the way Leo had asked at dinner if his daddy would have liked superheroes, but something in her cracked. My husband died on duty, she said suddenly, her voice low. 3 years ago. It was supposed to be a routine arrest. He never made it home. Julian's posture shifted. I'm sorry. I'm not telling you for sympathy. I'm telling you because I know what it's like to watch someone vanish while the system shrugs. He nodded slowly. We're not on the same side, Cara. But maybe. We're not so far apart either. She hated that he used her first name. Hated even more that it sounded good in his voice. Their eyes met, steady, curious, cautious. Cara pulled her coat around her. Don't mistake a late-night coffee for a truce, Blake. I wouldn't dream of it. But even as she left the diner, her thoughts stayed behind, sitting across from him, in a booth stained with years of secrets, wondering why her heartbeat hadn't slowed since he walked in. Chapter 5, A Whisper in the Dark. The hallway outside Cara's apartment was quiet, but inside, the stillness was deceptive. Cara stood frozen in the kitchen, one hand on the edge of the countertop, the other gripping her phone. The call had been brief, only a few muffled words through the line before it disconnected, but what she'd heard was chilling. Leo had picked it up by accident, playing with her cell when she stepped away to take a shower. When she returned, his face was pale, his small hands clutching the phone like it might burn him. Mama. Someone said they were watching you. Cara took a deep breath, crouched beside him, and gently pried the phone from his fingers. What exactly did they say, baby? He looked down. They said you're getting too close. And that someone already died because of it. Her blood went cold. She hugged him tightly, then tucked him into bed with his favorite dinosaur and turned on his nightlight. But her mind was racing. The number was blocked. The call lasted less than 20 seconds. Still, it meant one thing, someone was watching her. Closely. Meanwhile, Julian sat alone in his high-rise apartment, whiskey in hand, his laptop casting an eerie glow against the glass walls. He'd spent hours poring over Damian Crane's alibi again. On paper, it was airtight, an exclusive charity gala, dozens of witnesses, time-stamped photos. But something about it itched at the back of his brain. Then he found it. In one of the photos, Damian was toasting with a glass of champagne, but in the reflection behind him, barely noticeable, was a clock. And the time didn't match the official statement. It was off by over an hour. Julian zoomed in again and again, his pulse quickening. It wasn't a mistake. It was a lie. And now he knew it. He leaned back in his chair, dragging a hand through his hair. If he presented this, he'd be discredited by his own client. If he stayed silent, he'd become complicit. The knock at his door startled him. He opened it to find Damian himself, casual and smiling, as if nothing was wrong. Thought we could talk, Damian said. Just wanted to make sure we're on the same page. Julian stepped aside, jaw clenched. Of course. Come in. Back at Cara's, she returned to her kitchen table and began sketching out a new timeline. She added the mysterious phone call, circled the missing footage again, and drew a line connecting it all back to the Crane family. She paused, staring at the growing web of lies and threats. Then she added something new, Leo. Target? Her hand trembled slightly. This wasn't just about her anymore. It never had been. Up in Julian's penthouse, Damian stood by the window, sipping Julian's scotch and watching the city lights. Some things are better left untouched, Julian, he said smoothly. You're doing good work. Don't ruin it by growing a conscience. Chapter 6, A Kiss Before Betrayal. The alley was dark, slick with recent rain and the sharp tang of city grime. Cara pressed her back to the brick wall, heart pounding as she crept closer to the rusted metal door where her informant had told her to meet. The lead was thin, just a name scrawled on a napkin by a jittery ex-employee of Crane Pharmaceuticals, but it was something. She didn't expect the ambush. A blur of movement. A hand over her mouth. The cold sting of metal grazing her side. Cara fought back viciously, knee to the ribs, elbow to the jaw, but there were two of them. Masked. Professional. One of them slammed her against the wall, growling, "You should have dropped this case, detective." Suddenly, headlights swept across the alley. Tires screeched. The attackers fled as a black car roared in, stopping just inches from Cara. The driver's door flew open. Julian. "Jesus, Cara," he shouted, rushing to her side. "Are you okay?" She nodded, dazed, blood trickling from a cut on her temple. "What the hell are you doing here?" "I followed you," he admitted, out of breath. "I saw your notes at the diner." I knew you were going after this lead alone. Cara tried to push him away, but stumbled. He caught her, steadying her against him. For a moment, they just stood there, close, too close. Her hands clutched the fabric of his coat. His breath hitched as he looked at her, really looked. You could have been killed, he murmured. I'm used to that, she whispered. And then he kissed her. It wasn't soft. It wasn't careful. It was raw, electric, two people clinging to something real in the middle of too many lies. When they pulled apart, the storm returned. Cara stepped back, blinking as reality crashed over her. This doesn't change anything, she said, her voice rough. You're still defending Crane. You still stand between me and justice. Julian hesitated. Cara. But she was already walking away, shaking, confused, alive in ways she hadn't felt in years. The next day in court, Julian sat poised at the defense table, Crane beside him like a spoiled king. Cara took the stand again, bruises carefully concealed under her shirt collar. Her testimony was damning, clear, sharp, and irrefutable. Until Julian stood up. Detective Martinez, he said smoothly. How certain are you that the call logs weren't tampered with? After all, you said yourself you were attacked. Doesn't that suggest someone is trying to mislead the investigation? Possibly even you? Cara froze. He was twisting it, again. Turning her pain into a weapon. The kiss from the night before now burned in her memory like betrayal. She didn't flinch. Didn't cry. But her eyes said everything as she stared him down from the stand. You chose him. You chose your side. And Julian, who had rehearsed this line of questioning a dozen times, suddenly couldn't meet her gaze. Chapter 7, The Ghost File. The precinct was nearly empty, save for the low hum of fluorescent lights and the occasional rustle of paper from the night desk sergeant. Cara sat alone in the archive room, surrounded by dust-coated boxes stacked high like forgotten tombstones of justice that never came. She pulled one closer, coughing as the dust hit her lungs. She wasn't sure what she was looking for, only that something inside her refused to stop. The attack in the alley, Julian's betrayal in court, the whisper of conspiracy just beneath the surface, it all pointed to something bigger. Something buried. And then, she found it. A cardboard box, sealed with brittle red tape, labeled in faded ink, Martinez, J. Internal Review, closed. Her breath caught. Her husband's file. She sliced it open with her pocket knife, heart pounding. Inside, transcripts, old reports, case photos. Most of it was familiar. But tucked at the bottom was something she'd never seen before. A flash drive. Black. Unlabeled. Cara slipped it into her laptop. Static. Then a grainy video feed popped up, body cam footage from Jacob Martinez's final night. He was chasing a suspect through a construction site, breath ragged, radio crackling in the background. But what stopped her cold wasn't the chase, it was the brief flash of a logo on a storage container as her husband passed, Crane Pharmaceuticals. A site they supposedly had no connection to at the time. Jacob had been investigating them. The screen cut out abruptly. The timestamp ended less than 30 minutes before the fatal gunshot. Cara stared at the screen, her hands shaking. Had Jacob discovered something he wasn't supposed to? Had his death been more than a random shooting? Her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Stop digging. You're next. She stood abruptly, chair scraping across the floor. Rage and fear surged together in her chest. But beneath them both was something else, clarity. She wasn't paranoid. She was getting close. Across the city, Julian stared down at his glass of bourbon, the memory of Cara's eyes in court still haunting him. He hadn't meant to cross her like that, not after the alley, the kiss, the unspoken something that had sparked between them. But Crane had watched him too closely. Every move, every word, scrutinized. One misstep, and Julian wouldn't just lose the case, he'd lose everything. Still, the guilt gnawed at him. When he opened his briefcase later that night, he found something slipped between the files. A photograph. It was old. Grainy. But the image was unmistakable, Jacob Martinez, standing outside a Crane facility with a look of concern on his face. Behind him, in the corner of the frame, stood Alistair Crane, speaking to someone in the shadows. Julian's stomach turned. What the hell had he gotten himself into? And worse, what if he was defending the very people who had killed Cara's husband? Chapter 8, Cracks in the Facade. The manila envelope sat between them like a ticking bomb. They met in the back corner of Bryant Park, far from watchful eyes and eager ears. Cara's hood was pulled low, Julian's coat collar turned up. For once, neither of them looked polished. They looked like people with too many secrets. I'm not supposed to have this, Julian muttered, handing her the envelope. "I didn't make a copy. I don't want it traced back to me." Cara opened it cautiously. Inside were lab reports, shredded internal emails, and a risk assessment from Crane Pharmaceuticals. Highlighted in red ink were the words, "Test Phase B not approved for human subjects." And yet the dates prove the trials have continued. She inhaled sharply. These tests. These were conducted in East Harlem. The address matches an old pediatric clinic. Julian looked away. And guess which neighborhood got a sudden spike in unexplained hospital admissions 3 years ago? Cara's voice dropped. "That's where my husband was working undercover." He nodded. "You weren't wrong." He was getting close. A long silence passed between them, only broken by the sound of distant traffic and rustling leaves. Cara held the documents close to her chest like armor. "Why are you doing this?" she asked. "After everything?" Julian met her eyes, guilt carved into every line of his face. "Because I believed in what I was doing, until I realized I was being used to bury the truth. I can't undo what I've already done. But maybe I can still help." Something in her softened, but not enough to forgive. She turned to go, but Julian reached for her wrist. "Wait." Cara froze. "I know I don't deserve your trust," he said quietly. "But I meant it. That night. In the alley. It wasn't a lie." She pulled her hand free. "You didn't need to lie with words. You did it in court." And then she walked away, leaving Julian standing alone in the chill of the early evening. Back at her apartment, Cara sifted through the stolen documents by lamplight while Leo did homework beside her, humming quietly to himself. For the first time, she felt the ground begin to shift under her feet, not with fear, but purpose. Everything was beginning to connect: her husband's death, the suppressed trials, Crane's empire built on hidden victims. Then her phone rang. The school. She answered quickly, concern rising. "This is Detective Martinez, Leo's mother." The voice on the other end was calm but tense. "We were hoping Leo was homesick today. He never showed up for class." Cara's blood ran cold. She dropped the phone and rushed into the next room. The window was open. Leo was gone. Chapter 9, Kidnapped. The apartment was a whirlwind of overturned cushions, scattered notebooks, and the sound of Cara's frantic breathing. She tore through every room, calling Leo's name as if he might be hiding behind the shower curtain or under the bed. She stumbled back into the living room, heart hammering against her ribs. The window hadn't been broken. No forced entry. Just open. Quiet. Calculated. Her phone was still on the floor where she dropped it. She snatched it up and dialed the precinct. "This is Detective Martinez. My son, he's missing. I need an Amber Alert. Now." She gave the dispatcher everything: Leo's height, the last clothes he wore, the gap in his front teeth, the little dinosaur backpack he always carried. But even as she spoke, she could feel it in her gut: this wasn't some random kidnapping. This was a message. She was shaking as she hung up, staring at the documents Julian had given her. One phrase flashed in her mind again and again: Phase B, pediatric viability. A knock at the door. Cara reached for her gun and swung it open. It was Julian. "I saw the alert," he said, breathless. "I came as soon as I heard." "Cara, what happened?" Her voice was raw. "They took him. Crane's people. They knew I was getting close." He looked at her, then at the papers strewn across the coffee table. "They're going to move him. Fast. We have to think like them." "Where would they take him? That's off the grid, no surveillance, no digital footprint." Cara's eyes were wild. "If you know something, Julian, now's the time to stop playing lawyer and start acting like a human being." Julian took a steadying breath. "I know one place. It's an abandoned medical facility in Queens. Private property. No records of decommission. My firm used to scrub real estate purchases for Crane. I saw the address once. I'll take you." Cara didn't wait. She grabbed her gun, her badge, and her keys. As they drove through the night, silence filled the car, thick with fear, rage, and something else neither of them wanted to name. The building was exactly what Julian described: old, gray, rotting. But when they got inside, it was clear it hadn't been abandoned at all. Clean floors. Locked doors. Security cameras. Cara moved like a storm, sweeping corners, checking rooms, gun steady. Julian stayed behind her, tense but focused. Then they heard it, a muffled cry. "Leo?" Cara shouted, her voice cracking. They found him in a small exam room, strapped to a gurney, dazed but unharmed. She fell to her knees, tears spilling over as she freed him and pulled him into her arms. "I've got you, baby. I've got you." Julian stood guard at the door, eyes scanning the hallway. Then a voice echoed from the intercom system overhead. "You've made your point, detective. But this isn't over." Cara held Leo tighter as sirens wailed in the distance. Someone had tripped the alarm. She looked up at Julian, her voice fierce with new resolve. "They touched my son." He nodded grimly. Chapter 10, Family Secrets. The hospital lights were too bright, too sterile. They buzzed above Cara's head as she sat beside Leo's bed, gently stroking his hair while he slept. His face was pale, his small hands twitching as if still trapped in some nightmare. The doctors said he was physically unharmed, but the sedation, the psychological trauma, it would take time to heal. And Cara didn't have time. Julian stood just outside the room, watching through the glass, his jaw tense. He had barely spoken since they left the facility. Cara finally stepped out, pulling the door shut behind her. "I need answers," she said quietly, her voice ragged. Julian hesitated, then nodded. "You deserve them." They walked together into an empty consultation room. Julian closed the door behind them and pulled out a folded photo from his pocket, the same grainy surveillance image he'd found days ago, the one showing her husband standing outside the Crane facility, and just behind him, Alistair Crane. Cara took the photo with trembling hands. "My brother," Julian said, almost in a whisper, "is a board member at Crane Pharmaceuticals. We don't speak anymore. I didn't even know how deep he was until a few months ago." Cara's head snapped up. "Your brother?" He nodded grimly. "He's been in their pocket for years. Moved up the ladder fast. I kept my distance, thought I was being smart, separating myself from the family. But I see now I was just turning a blind eye." He walked to the window, his silhouette framed in sterile white light. "My mother died when I was young. My father buried himself in corporate law. My brother? He wanted power. I wanted to fight the system. Funny how we both ended up on the same payroll, one way or another." Cara crossed her arms, trying to ground herself. "And my husband? He was onto them, wasn't he?" Julian turned to face her. He was close to exposing a trial involving children, experimental treatments, unregulated data collection. Leo's name was never in the system, but his school was one of the clinics they'd marked for potential observation. Cara's world tilted. "You're saying Leo was a target? Years ago?" "Yes," Julian said softly. "And your husband may have died trying to stop it." She staggered back a step, the walls closing in. The guilt was unbearable, how close she'd come to losing Leo forever, how long she'd ignored the signs. Julian moved closer, hesitant. "I never wanted this, Cara. I tried to compartmentalize, to believe in the cases I took. But I'm done defending monsters." She looked up at him, pain flickering behind her eyes. "Then help me destroy them." "I will," he said, voice firm. "But we can't go at them with hunches. We need undeniable proof. Enough to make them bleed publicly." Cara nodded. "Then we go after the brother." Julian hesitated again. "There's something else." "What?" He swallowed. "My firm. They know that I'm helping you. If I stay in this, I lose everything. My career. My future." Cara's gaze was sharp, unyielding. "Then decide, Blake. What matters more, your future? Or Leo's?" He didn't answer right away. But in that silence, something shifted between them. He already knew his answer. Chapter 11, Under Oath. The federal courthouse loomed like a cold monolith, its marble steps slick with morning drizzle. Cara stood beneath its towering pillars, her badge tucked deep in her coat pocket, where she could feel its weight but no longer wear it proudly. She had leaked internal documents to a journalist 2 nights ago. She hadn't waited for approval, hadn't followed protocol. She'd crossed the line, and she knew it. But she'd do it again in a heartbeat. Inside, the air was thick with tension. The Crane case had exploded overnight, thanks to the leaked report, a damning exposé detailing unethical trials, missing children, and quiet payoffs. Public outrage boiled. Reporters lined the halls like vultures, and the Department of Justice had moved faster than anyone anticipated. Crane Pharmaceuticals was under federal investigation. Julian adjusted his tie in the mirror of a private antechamber, the courtroom just on the other side of the heavy oak doors. His reflection stared back, composed, elegant, and terrified. He was about to give up everything. His partnership. His name. His reputation. His brother had already called him twice. The last voicemail had been calm, which scared Julian more than if it had been angry. "Don't be stupid. We both know what happens to people who testify." The doors opened. "Mr. Blake," the clerk said softly. "We're ready." He stepped into the courtroom, Past the rows of prosecutors and defense teams, straight to the witness stand. The room buzzed with anticipation. Cara sat in the back row, heart thundering. She didn't know what Julian would say. She only knew that the man she kissed in that alley, the man who helped save her son, wasn't the same one who once eviscerated her on the stand. Julian raised his right hand. Swore to tell the truth. The prosecutor began. "Mr. Blake, how long have you represented Crane Pharmaceuticals and its affiliates?" 6 years, Julian replied, his voice steady. "Until this week." "And why did that professional relationship end?" He hesitated, then said it. "Because I discovered they were using my legal strategies to suppress evidence of human testing on children, including undocumented trials and falsified death certificates." Gasps rippled through the room. Cameras clicked like mad. Julian went on, testifying for hours about the deception, the scrubbed real estate records, the falsified clinical studies. He spoke of internal memos, of silenced whistleblowers, of accidents that were nothing of the sort. Then came the turning point. "Do you believe your firm knowingly assisted in covering up criminal activity?" Julian looked directly at his former mentor, Martin Lang, sitting in the gallery with a clenched jaw. "Yes," Julian said. "And I believe my brother helped orchestrate it." A stunned silence followed. The gavel slammed for order. Julian's career shattered in that moment, but he didn't flinch. Not once. Outside, Cara met him as he exited the courtroom. The media swarmed, but for a moment, it was just the two of them beneath a gray sky. "You did it," she said, voice thick. "I burned every bridge I had," he replied quietly. "Hope it was worth it." "It was," she whispered, touching his hand. "You told the truth. That's more than most people in that room ever will." He nodded, jaw tight. "Now it's your turn, Martinez. Let's finish this." Chapter 12, Fallout. Julian stared down at the letter in his hand, the ink smudged slightly from the rain that had started to fall outside the courthouse. The letterhead was unmistakable, Whitaker and Lang. The message was brief, clinical, and absolute. "Your services are no longer required. Effective immediately. You are hereby disbarred pending further investigation." He folded it carefully, almost gently, then tucked it into his coat pocket like a dead thing. A part of him had known this was coming. But knowing didn't soften the blow. On the courthouse steps, reporters shouted his name, flashing cameras turning his face into a portrait of disgrace. But Julian didn't stop for them. He walked right past, into the downpour. Cara was waiting. She had watched the verdict come down on Crane like a thunderclap. Federal agents raided the company's headquarters that morning. Damian Crane had been arrested again, this time in handcuffs that didn't slide off so easily. But the celebration was short-lived. Internal Affairs had suspended her pending an investigation into her unapproved conduct. She was off the case. Off the force. Just like that. Now she sat with Julian in the back booth of the same diner where their hostility had first cracked, sipping bitter coffee with a man who once twisted her testimony and now had destroyed his career to defend her truth. "You okay?" she asked, voice low. Julian gave a soft, humorless laugh. "Define okay." They were quiet for a while, watching the rain trail down the window in crooked lines. Then Cara said, "I think I'm more scared now than I was when they took Leo." Julian looked over. "Why?" "Because now. It's over. We got what we wanted. The Cranes are going down. But what's left for us?" He considered her words carefully. "A son who's safe. A city that's watching. And maybe, if we're lucky, a future." She turned to him, studying the man beneath the polished exterior. He looked tired. Hollowed out. But not broken. Not anymore. "You gave up everything," she said. Julian met her eyes. "So did you." Their hands brushed on the table. A small touch. Uncertain. But real. Later, back at her apartment, Leo was already asleep. Cara and Julian stood in the doorway of the boy's room, watching him breathe, peaceful, unaware of how close the darkness had come. Julian whispered, "He looks like Jacob." Cara nodded slowly. "Sometimes I see him in Leo's smile. Other times, in the way he's quiet when he's sad. Like he's holding it in." Julian didn't speak. He didn't have to. As the night deepened, they sat side by side on the couch. No courtroom. No case files. Just two people stripped bare by the war they'd fought and the damage left behind. "I don't know what happens next," Cara said. Julian leaned his head back, eyes closed. "Maybe that's okay," he murmured. "Maybe for once, we get to figure it out. Together." And for the first time in what felt like years, neither of them felt completely alone. Chapter 13, Love and Limbo. The new apartment smelled like fresh paint and dusty floors, still settling into its walls. It was small, just 2 bedrooms, creaky pipes, a humming radiator that didn't know how to shut up, but Julian liked it. It was his. No sweeping skyline views. No private elevator. Just quiet. And it was 2 blocks from Kara's. He unpacked slowly, methodically, as if placing his books and clothes on unfamiliar shelves might help him rebuild the man he used to be, before the firm, before Crane, before disbarment turned his name into a footnote in legal history. That afternoon, he knocked on Kara's door, holding a brown paper bag with dinner inside. "Chinese," he said. "Didn't think you'd say yes to Italian twice in 1 week." Kara opened the door wider. "Didn't think you'd still be in my life after burning yours down." Julian gave her a half-smile. "You make bad decisions feel strangely rewarding." Inside, Leo was sitting cross-legged on the living room floor, surrounded by puzzle pieces and a worn superhero cape. He looked up, and his face lit up. "Julian." Julian knelt beside him. "Still working on that 500-piece monster?" Leo grinned. "You promised you'd help me with the sky part." Kara watched them for a moment, a warmth blooming in her chest. But it was fragile. Unsteady. Later, after Leo had fallen asleep and the apartment quieted, Kara poured them both glasses of wine. They sat on the couch, the silence between them not awkward, but full of questions neither dared ask yet. "You really staying?" she asked, not looking at him. "I've got nowhere else I want to be," he said honestly. She took a slow sip. "You've changed." Julian leaned forward. "So have you." And yet, some things hadn't. Her eyes still darted to the door when the wind knocked too hard. Her hand still hovered protectively near Leo's room when she heard a creak. The trauma hadn't left. It had just changed shape. "I'm still waiting for the other shoe to drop," she admitted. Julian looked at her. What if it already did? And we're just still standing? She didn't answer. 2 days later, Julian's brother showed up. He found Julian outside a bodega, holding Leo's hand as they picked up ice cream. The man was sleek, calm, and cold-eyed, like a polished mirror of who Julian once was. "You've made some powerful enemies," his brother said flatly. Julian pulled Leo gently behind him. "And you're still protecting them?" "I'm warning you," the brother replied. "You think this is over? You burned their name. But now you've made it personal." Julian didn't flinch. "They made it personal when they touched that boy." His brother's mouth tightened. "You're a fool." "Maybe," Julian said. "But I finally know who I am." That night, Kara noticed Leo was restless in his sleep. He thrashed, muttering words she couldn't quite make out. "Mom," he whimpered. "The lights. The masks. Don't let them take me again." She wrapped her arms around him and held him until the trembling stopped. But deep inside, a new dread began to rise. Leo wasn't just traumatized. He was remembering. And someone out there might still want him gone. Chapter 14, The Blood Oath. The day started like any other, coffee brewed too strong, Leo refusing to wear socks, Kara slipping her badge from habit before remembering she no longer had one. But beneath the surface, everything had shifted. Leo's nightmares had worsened. He spoke names in his sleep, Dr. Mercer, Room 9, and the word test over and over. When she'd asked gently, Leo had blinked at her with a seriousness no 7-year-old should wear and said, "They told me I had special blood." Kara's heart nearly stopped. She brought it to Julian that afternoon, laying out medical files, archived reports, and a DNA result she'd pulled through an old contact in the lab. Leo carried a rare gene mutation. One that appeared in only a handful of children who'd all lived in targeted neighborhoods near Crane-affiliated research clinics. Children whose names appeared on a list Julian had stolen months ago. Most of those names were followed by the same word, deceased. Julian read the file in silence. Then slowly, he said, "Your husband knew about this. That's why he was killed." Kara stared at the wall, her voice barely a whisper. "Jacob tried to protect one of the kids. A foster girl. She disappeared 2 weeks before he died." Julian reached into his briefcase and pulled out a final sealed folder, something he'd been holding back until now. "I found this in a safety deposit box under your husband's name," he said. "He left it for you. In case he didn't make it." Kara opened it with trembling hands. Inside was a photo of a girl, about 10 years old, dark eyes and a faint smile. Scribbled beneath it. Subject X, identical blood type to Leo. They'll come for him too. And then, if anything happens to me, find Mercer. Dr. Gerald Mercer. Former lead researcher at Crane Pharmaceuticals. Reported dead 2 years ago in a lab explosion, except Kara had already confirmed it was a cover-up. Mercer was alive. And now, they knew why he mattered. That night, Cara sat Leo down. Explained, as gently as she could, why he'd been taken. Why he was different. Why he had to be careful. Leo only asked one question. Are they going to try again? She didn't lie. Yes. At midnight, her apartment door shattered. 3 masked men, armed and efficient, poured into the room. Cara pushed Leo into the bedroom closet and fired. 2 shots. 1 hit. Chaos exploded around her. Julian, who had been sleeping on her couch that night, tackled the nearest attacker, disarming him, until a shot rang out. He collapsed. Cara screamed. In the seconds that followed, she fired again. Every shot precise, furious. 1 intruder dead. The other fled. The third, bleeding out. She dropped to her knees beside Julian. Julian, no, stay with me. His hand found hers, slick with blood. I'm okay, he gasped. It's not the heart. Sirens howled in the distance. Neighbors had called it in. Help was coming. But Cara couldn't stop shaking. She held Julian against her, Leo crying softly in the closet nearby. The war wasn't over. Not yet. But now, there was blood on her floor, and no more time to wait. It was her turn to draw the line. And she would die before she let them take her son again. Chapter 15, The Verdict. The courtroom was packed, every seat filled, every aisle lined with reporters, federal agents, and victims who had come to watch justice rise from the ruins. The Crane Empire, once untouchable, now stood on trial in the public eye, stripped of its polished veneer and laid bare for the world to see. Cara sat in the front row, Leo's small hand tucked in hers. He wore a navy blazer he insisted made him look like a tiny lawyer, but his eyes never left Julian, who sat in a witness box once more, this time not as a defense attorney, but as a key figure in dismantling the very system he once served. His injuries were still healing. A sling hugged his left arm, the bullet wound still tender. But his voice was clear. I assisted Crane Pharmaceuticals in concealing trial data involving minors, he said. I did so unknowingly at first, and when I discovered the truth, I turned whistleblower. I am responsible for my silence. But I will not be silent now. The prosecution moved swiftly. With Julian's documents, Cara's leaked intel, and recovered footage from the facility in Queens, where Leo had been held, they built an unshakable case. The names of the dead echoed in the courtroom like ghosts given voice. And then came the final blow. Cara took the stand. Her voice didn't waver as she told the jury what she'd lost, her husband, her badge, her sense of safety. She showed them the files Jacob had left behind. She detailed the night they came for her son. The pain. The fear. The resolve. When she stepped down, the room was silent. The verdict came swiftly. Guilty. Criminal negligence. Medical fraud. Conspiracy. Murder. Alistair Crane was led out in handcuffs, his expression blank, his empire crumbling. Damian Crane followed, eyes hollow, no longer the smug heir, but just another criminal awaiting sentencing. The courtroom exhaled. Justice, finally, had found its mark. Outside, the sun had broken through the clouds. Cara stood with Julian and Leo on the courthouse steps, flashes from cameras lighting their faces like starlight. But they didn't care about the attention. They cared about the quiet between them. I don't have a ring, Julian said, turning to her. I don't have a license to practice law. I don't even have a plan. Cara arched a brow. And yet? Julian smiled, small, tender, genuine. I have you. And Leo. And that's more than I ever thought I deserved. Then, in front of a sea of flashing lenses and the city that nearly broke them, he dropped to one knee. Cara Martinez. Will you marry me? She didn't hesitate. Yes. Leo cheered, arms flung wide, and the crowd erupted behind them, not for the spectacle, but for the victory. For truth. For love carved from fire. And as they walked down those courthouse steps together, hand in hand, free at last, Manhattan didn't feel quite so cold anymore.